Last time, we talked about how we can use the if statement to implement the selection control structure to make decisions in our code. This time, we're going to talk about another C# statement, the switch statement, that we can also use to make decisions in our code. Given what I just said, you should do an in-video quiz to show that you don't ignore me until we get to the actual coding stuff. Okay, now that you've shown that you don't ignore me, let's go do some actual coding in MonoDevelop. Because the switch statement is just another way we can do selection, our starting code for the switch statement lecture is essentially the same as the ending code from the if statements lecture. So we're going to ask the user if they want to pick up the shiny thing and save their answer, and then we'll print an appropriate message. And I even left the if statement code here commented out so that you can see the parallels between a switch statement and an if statement. So for a switch statement, we put the word switch, and we're switching on the value of a particular variable. So this is answer because it's the variable that we used in our Boolean expressions for our if statement. So the behavior of the switch statement is based on the value of the answer variable. The way we indicate which code the switch statement should execute is by providing cases. So we'll say case 1, which means if the value of the answer variable is 1, do the following. And the following is this right here from our if statement. So I'll put that right there. And the last piece I put under each case is the keyword break. And you can just think of this as the closed curly brace for the if clause, if you'd like. It's just sort of a way to end that particular case. So if I control F5 and I say 1, it executes that case. If I control F5 and say 2, it doesn't do it. And of course, if I enter the dork input, it doesn't do it as well. So this is essentially like the if statement, and we can just include as many cases as we want. So if you recall, in the previous lecture, what we did next was we included an else clause for anything that wasn't 1. And the way we indicate all the other possible values for the answer variable that have not been included in cases is by using the word default. And so if we put default, that's like else, and this is what we originally said in that else clause. And we always put a break. And now if I control F5, we get yes. We get you don't have the shiny thing. And the user can be a dork, and we don't berate them for being a dork. So the last thing we'll do here is we'll add a case for the input 2, and that will be you don't have the shiny thing. With a break. And then the if they haven't entered a 1 or a 2 message, we'll be calling them a dork. So if I control F5, you have the shiny thing with 1. You don't have the shiny thing with 2. And a dork input gets you the dork message. So the switch statement is just another way to do selection in our code. And one is not necessarily better than the other. Once we start using things like enumerations more regularly, perhaps to keep track of the game state, if we're in the menu system versus playing the game or something like that, we'll tend to use switch statements more. But we probably use if statements a lot more regularly than we use switch statements. So mostly the if statement versus switch statement decision is personal preference, although there are variables that you're not allowed to switch on. So basically we can't switch on a float because there aren't a set of discrete values like 1 and 2 and so on to check for, because there are so many possible floating point numbers. So there are some limitations to the variable on which you can switch, and we'll probably use if statements more regularly, but the switch statement is another option when you're executing the selection control structure. To recap, in this lecture, we learned how we can use the switch statement in C# to make decisions in our code.